that's kind of like the main discrepancy. Sorry, the main problem I think that you and I have with the gender pay gap is that you and I, what we want, this is kind of a Jordan Peterson one as well, and you know what I'm going to say, like you and I want equal means of opportunity. We want everyone to be in the exact same playing field, so that when they enter a field and they have this much education, they have the exact same chances as someone else that's walking into that field. I don't want every workplace to have 50% women and 50% men. It's because that means inevitably there are going to be people there that don't love their job, or they've just been incentivized to go there because they're earning more money than the opposite gender.
No.
Yeah, exactly. It's not. It's just fundamentally not fair.
3, 2, 1. It seems like last week's topic was quite a catalyst for our thought process this week, because both of our topics, for the first time ever, like you mentioned earlier, seem to be in a theme this week.
We're on the same page, and yeah, you're right. It's weird that it follows on directly from last week, but as I said, I really thought that the conversation we had about saving touched upon a bunch of threads that we could have gone in more detail on, and I think that's exactly what we're actually going to do today.
Well, we seem to do that in a lot of episodes, where there are plenty of times where we go through the conversation and like I've got like bullet points of things I like to cover. We kind of go through them, but we do every so often go on a little tangent and we're like, oh, that could be a conversation of another day, and then we just completely forget about them. But this week, week we seem to have like come back, and it was only today actually I thought of this topic. It was one I'd thought about it for a while, but today I was like, let's do this one, I guess.
Yeah. Mine was just Monday when I was after finishing uploading the last video, when I was rewatching it over when editing, and yeah, so this should be quite good, I hope.
Yeah, so if you haven't caught last week's episode about how to save money, then maybe a good one to go back and look at before you watch this episode. But if you didn't know, this is Guide to the 21st Century, a conversational podcast between two friends, Lewis and I, discussing topical issues and trying to navigate the minefield that is life in the 21st century.
Each week, Scott and I think of an episode that's been playing in our mind throughout the week, and we bring that to the format of the show, where we disseminate our views, discuss what's been kicking around, and basically try and reach a new conclusion that we wouldn't have reached on our own.
So I'm first this week, and as I was thinking about my topic, I started to think about Guide in general, because Guide sort of was intended to be a guide at the start. Like, we came up with this idea of a show where we could think about topics that we weren't exactly certain how to act about, things that we could like bounce off each other and try to come sort of some sort of reasonable conclusion on how we should act. So like the first week, it was quite clear that was our goal when I spoke about like the backlash that LGBTQ plus people receive, and you spoke about how we should be reacting towards media that tries to like push a message.
Yeah, we were looking for solutions.
Yeah, we were looking for more like day to day, how should we be reacting to these things, you know. But in the end, we've actually gone through like a whole range of topics, and there's not a clear conclusion in every episode of how we should be acting as like people, even though that was what the show was kind of originally intended to do. And while the podcast is not specifically political, a lot of the topics do end up venturing into political territory. And like I say, while we don't have like immediate conclusions for these topics, I was kind of looking back on the episodes where we don't have immediate answers, and I thought about how at least we're like thinking about them, and if nothing else, they've influenced my opinions. So, and especially when it comes to like voting, I think we look back at a few of the issues that we spoke about, like the Black Lives Matter movement, like the LGBTQ plus movement, the way that we think about how transgender kids should be treated. You know, all of these are kind of like, they're becoming political issues, even though they are kind of
as much as they're social. Exactly.
Yeah, so they're becoming kind of political issues, and we talk about money and some more, I guess, politically aligned messages as well. And at least they're influenced my view on how to vote going forward. So these are kind of the policies that I'll look for. I'll realise that this is how I now think about them.
Yeah, or you'll realise that you now have a thought about them, whereas before you didn't have a fucking clue.
Exactly. So when it came to like rising sea levels, now we kind of have a little bit of information on how to base platforms on which we think. So when I look at, you know, political platforms, and I'll go in the boxes and I get to the environmental, you know, policy, I'll look at that and I'll see if it aligns with what we spoke about. So it's been quite an educational show at the same time, even if we're not changing the way that we act on a day-by-day basis. So to follow on from last week's topic, which I brought, which was money and kind of how to save money in the 21st century, I want to talk about the gender pay gap. And as I've thought about it, once again, I kind of bring a topic to the table where there seem to be like two sides that are kind of discussing this really hotly debated issue. It's been quite
Right.
contentious for the last maybe 5, 10 years. I'm not really sure, at least in my mind.
Definitely 5 years, definitely.
Yeah, where you've got one side that claims the gender pay gap is like all to do with gender. It's like a totally sexist statistic in general, and you've got another side that kind of complains that it's been debunked, like it doesn't really exist. It's not about gender, sort of thing. And I think, as usual, both these sides are almost completely incorrect.
Okay.
So, what do you think's going on with the gender pay gap? Like, what is your view of it as it stands at the moment?
Mm. So you're right. The gender pay gap's like a massive issue, and it's like for people that don't know, like actually in the in like the UK, like companies have to legally disclose what the gender pay gap is. You know, and like have to say what's the average median earning of a woman or average median earning of a man. My kind of view about the whole thing is that the issue is coming from the right place. You know, the idea is that it wants equality for people, and that's a noble goal always, pretty much always. But I think it fundamentally approaches the problem from maybe the wrong angle, and it suffers from lots of oversimplifications, which happens with I think a lot of the issues that we end up talking about in the guide.
Yeah, so they kind of come backwards, where it's like you've got like an equation and a result, and they'll look at the result and they're like, well, how can we change that? And they go backwards through the equation instead of like going forwards. Yes, that's a good point.
So that's basically my main observation. Like, in term, I'm sure we'll get into some of the more nuanced issues. I'm kind of like I'm of the viewpoint that one of the major ways this gets simplified is that we equate. You know, we basically say that if women are earning less, that's because people are being sexist. Where obviously there's more nuance to it. Where you know, they're like biological factors that are at play here that can't be deconvoluted quite as simply. So I guess that's my overall view of it. Right now, I believe in first world countries in the UK, I think the gender pay gap is not our biggest problem. You know, I think it is a problem and it exists. But in terms of some of the other issues that we've talked about on the guide, I think it's not. For instance, like obesity. I think obesity is probably a bigger crisis than the disparity we see between the gender pay gap, but it's not there.
Yeah, my thoughts on like the gender pay gap are that it obviously exists. Like there's no, I don't think there's any denying that it exists. You know,
No.
we have, you're right, because in my research I found that the companies that have over 250 employees are legally required to disclose the information. And I was looking at it's like a Department of Trade or something like that the UK, they put out a report every year basically that has the statistics on it. And
Okay.
I think it was like quite groundbreaking actually when the UK like introduced that kind of law.
Yeah.
So this report gets produced every year, and there is discrepancy between the two. Is discrepancy the word I'm looking for? There are differences between the two pay
Yeah.
mean and median between men and women, and no matter what the cause of that, whether it's to do with gender or not, there is a difference between the amount that a woman gets paid and a man gets paid on average. Like you can't scientifically look at that and say, well, there's no difference here, because there's like a percentage difference
There's a yeah.
in the money. So there definitely is something to it there.
Yes, exactly.
Whether or not the factors that introduce that gender pay gap are sexist or not is another story. And I think you're right. People do simplify it down to, well, this must be sexist, and it's like, well, we don't actually know that. And then my second thought on it is, I feel like I'm always kind of harping on about this on the show as well, where we have a bunch of people who have their minds and their hearts in the right place, where they want to make people equal. You know, they want to give everybody a fair choice and a fair standing on where they
Right.
begin. And I think the sort of things that they want to implement and the ways that they go about it, again, I'm worried that these are going to be too drastic, and I'm worried about the effects these are going to have on people in general, because I wonder how much of the gender pay gap is to do with which occupations people choose. So specifically between, like,
Sure.
we spoke last week, or was it last week? I'm not sure, about the sort of personality differences between men and women. I think maybe 2 weeks ago actually.
Yeah. That's right.
And I specifically gave a story about me at my work and a girl at my work who had totally different sort of tactics when it came to like our review scores and getting a pay rise.
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes to these personality differences, I wonder how much, because men typically go into fields like STEM and women typically go into fields like nursing and things like that. These are dominated fields by gender. I wonder how much of that choice is influencing the gender pay gap. And if we start to look at equaling the pay, we're starting to think about like stopping women from going into nursing and stopping men
Right.
from going
Yeah.
into engineering, and then sort of crossing them over, if you know what I mean. Because
Mm-hmm.
people, especially people that talk about just like having equality of outcome, which would mean to make the numbers exactly the same.
50-50, exactly.
The
Yeah.
only way to do that would be to make everything 50-50. And
Yeah.
I worry that that would have a drastic effect on people's happiness, especially in their like freedom to choose what they want to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what I was going to mention actually, was that you're talking about stopping people from taking jobs, but what I've actually heard businesses doing is that after like the reports have come out and they talk about what the gender pay gap is, like companies in the UK have said that by 2025, 50% of our management staff will be women. It's like, how are you going to do that?
Mm.
Like, you presumably right now you're hiring people based on competency. I'm going to assume that you're not doing it because you're a bunch of sexist bigots that want to clown around with a bunch of guys. You're working for a business, and the business wants to make money. You have a certain percentage of women that fill these roles, these managerial positions, and you expect to come up with an extra percentage. Like, how is that going to? How does that work? Like, you're going to incentivize them with money, but that's not. I don't think that's a solution. It comes, it's like, as you said, a huge amount of this conversation ties into what we're talking about in the raising your kids gender neutral episode, which was 2 weeks ago, and it was kind of talking about this idea of masculine versus feminine traits. And one of the points that I remember we discussed, and what I believed was that, in terms of, we agree that there's such a thing as like masculine traits and feminine traits. Obviously there's like a spectrum, and you can never define someone and pigeonhole them, but when you look at a million people, you'll find that women tend to stick to some things and men tend to stick to other things. You seem to find that like the personality traits and the fields of interest that men are interested in as opposed to women seem to just be more profitable. For instance, like you said, STEM is just it's just a high paying field. It's like it's I'm not gonna I'm not even gonna question why. I mean, it's difficult, I know that much, but like nursing is really difficult as well, but it's not the same type of thing. So like nursing is comparatively undervalued, which has a larger percentage of what I would consider like female traits, compared to STEM, which is a large percentage of male traits. And like there's this people, it almost feels like the system is set up to punish people for doing what they enjoy. And what you're talking about exactly is changing the system by forcing it out of the current status quo. Right now we have perceived inequality, but people are filling the roles that they enjoy. We're talking about filling the roles so that there is equal outcomes, which will inevitably break the status quo, which you have to assume is people enjoying their jobs.
Yeah, there's something to be said about the idea that these sort of like masculine dominated fields are the ones that generate profits. Like when we looked at the masculine and feminine traits, you can see why that would be the case, because in like businesses where, the business has a service and it'll do something, the business will provide some sort of service that will generate profit.
Mm-hmm.
And all the business wants to do is generate money. Now, a good way to do that would be to have a good customer like relation, would be to provide a good service so that customers will return. So in order to do that, you'll have to have like a good sort of face on the company. You'll have to look like they would do things like be more environmentally friendly and sort of boast about that. They would try and increase their image. All of those things would add to like the profitability. But if we look at like the masculine and feminine traits, we look at the feminine ones were more sort of like caring, generosity, working together, whereas the masculine ones were more sort of like goal orientated, logical thinking, rational, competitive. Exactly. Those are the sort of traits that you would want if you were trying to drive profits.
Right.
So the people that want to drive profits will go like into that field, and it's is it unfortunate or not? I'm not sure. It just so happens that males generally have more of those traits and go into those fields. So the gender pay gap right now, as per the report of 2020, in the UK currently sits at 6.5% between mean values and 15.9% for median values. Now, I'm not sure how that discrepancy is like so high between the two of them, first of all,
Right.
because like the median one would just be like all of them lined up, pick the middle
yeah.
one, but then the mean would be all them added up and divided by the total number.
Oh, I guess that'll have something to do with the distribution of high earners versus low earners, right? If there's a lot of males that earn a huge chunk of money, it would increase the
Right.
median.
No, that'll
Or
increase the mean. That
right, yeah. But I think that has to do with it. That describes the shape of the distribution, I guess.
Yeah, but you would think that the median would then be the smaller discrepancy because the larger earners aren't affecting the middle value so much, but they're affecting the mean value quite a lot. So it's kind of backwards.
Right.
And it almost implies that there are like women are like more represented above the mean pay or above the median pay. I'm not really sure how that shakes up.
This is exactly what we're talking about when we're saying there's hidden complexity here. You cannot put in a BBC title, women earn 6% less than men, and expect that that figure to stick, you know? Like, even just, like you said, we're looking at median versus mean, and we're like, wait a second, this isn't the full story here. From that fucking statement alone, this is not an easy issue, and people keep acting like it is an easy issue.
Yeah, so I don't know how that works. I'm not even sure. And the report didn't even try to explain either. It just like gave the two facts, and it was like,
Lovely.
it then went on to talk about how apparently 70% of the mean pay gap disappears if men and women were to be equally represented at each stage of earning. So according to this report, as the sort of wage brackets go up, men are more represented than women are. There becomes a higher percentage of men compared to women, which accounts for some of the gender pay gap, apparently like 70% of it, which is like massive. So there's like a lot of men that are being like promoted up
in higher positions,
and women aren't being promoted as often, which has apparently a huge effect on the mean gender pay gap.
See, to be honest with you, man, like I can only speak anecdotally, but that fits with most views of businesses that I've seen. See, when it comes to most businesses that aren't massive, you know, like businesses that are fucking relatively grassroots type of thing, as a general rule, managers are more male. And to be fair, I've only worked in certain industries, and it's all been related to like manufacturing, which is quite a male-dominated industry as is. But yeah, anecdotally, that doesn't surprise me whatsoever. That you just tend to see women progress further within organizations, and I do believe that there is a degree of sexism to that. I really, really do. Like, I know that
there must be. Like
that's another. That is what I have seen anecdotally. Like when I used to work for like a sign factory, like the guy was like quite old fashioned. He was a bit of a fucking arsehole actually, and like I knew like he was not giving promotions to certain women because they were women. You know, like he would rather hire a guy outside of the business than promote someone up that already does it, and that's just because he's thinking to himself, she's going to have a Wayne in 2 years. Like he was a bit of a scumbag like that. So I do believe that that makes sense to me that most of the gender payback is coming from discrepancies in position, as opposed to maybe the other issues like you mentioned, as opposed to women just being more conscientious and maybe asking for less salaries as opposed to guys.
Yeah. So when I started thinking about the gender pay gap, I thought there are probably, when it comes to it, I bet you there are a few factors that are quite prevalent in how it manifests itself. And I think you just clocked onto one of them there. And the first one that I think of immediately, that I think maybe has like a more immediate answer, something that we can do something about like more immediately, if we, as a society we would agree on it, is paternity leave. Because
yes,
when a woman has a child, she almost takes like a year sabbatical from her work, you know, and it's like she's just off for a year. And in that year, if she has, even if there's like a male employee in the office at the same time, she's not learning that year. She's not getting any better at her job. In fact, she's actually getting worse because she's forgetting things.
Yeah, it was degrading.
Yeah, so her skills at work are degrading. And if she then comes back to work, and then we fast forward a year where they've both been doing the same job again, he's had so much more learning. If they were quote unquote equal in terms of like their competence, he would be more competent now because he's had another year of experience.
Sure.
he would be promoted, you know, because the business would look at him and say, yeah, you are more competent actually, so you'll get the promotion sort of thing. And that seems inherently unfair to start with, you know?
I mean, it doesn't seem inherently unfair because what's happening is fair. You know, you're giving the person with more responsibility and more knowledge, more money, and more opportunities of promotion. That is like the fair thing. The unfair thing is that women have to take off a year and a half to have a kid and raise it for the first 6 months. You know, but that you can't even call that unfair because that's just how it is.
But it's like, almost like a biological disadvantage for them in the workplace, you know?
In the workplace, exactly, yeah. I thought to myself the other day, like someone I work with, as I said, they're going to get pregnant, and they're not super older than me, and I thought to myself, at this stage in my career, I had to take, you know, a year and a half off. Like, I'm just getting into it. I'm just getting my teeth into it at this stage of my lfe, you know, like late 20s, mid-20s. And like that would be such a sacrifice to your progress in terms of like career development. It's a hit and a half, and it just makes perfect sense why businesses would, like what we said, when we're thinking about businesses, we need to remember that these are machines that make money. You know, imagine no personalities, imagine no human traits. They've got two people, one of them just seems like they're going to make more money, you know. And also, like, yeah, it's a difficult one, and this is a really interesting issue because like, I remember you and I spoke about the wage gap. Sorry, not the wage gap. Paternity leave a couple times now, and probably one of like the biggest arguments we ever had was, it wasn't even an argument now I think about it, but it was coming up with a solution to this because we
were also pretty drunk at the time, so
we were also probably pretty drunk at the time, and I remember we were like arguing for about an hour over a subtle nuance.
You were also just leaving to go to Bristol, so there was a bit of tension in the air because we weren't going to see each other for like months and months. Yeah.
Oh god, yeah. Okay, I couldn't have even told you that. Yeah, so it was a bit tense. To be fair, but I remember when you and I were trying to think of the fact that there's like a discrepancy right now in what's offered to men and women, and I remember that I thought that what would just solve this issue was if every man was offered the exact same paternity as the woman. So like if a woman's going to take off 9 months to have a kid, the man needs to take 9 months to have a kid. And I think we were all along a really similar lines of thinking when we were talking about that. The idea basically was that you're literally removing this whole concept of, well, she might have a kid. It's because now anyone has an equal probability. If you're like sitting at 25, you're probably going to have a kid in a couple of years. It doesn't matter whether you're female or male. You're probably going to degrade while you're having that kid, but it's fine. It's because you're not going to be making that decision based on anyone. So now the only advantage is people that don't choose to have kids, which sure you could say that's another inequality, but to me it feels like it just solves the issue.
Yeah, because the example that I have about the maternity paternity leave situation is from I've only worked at one place in my career. I left uni, I joined this company, I've worked here ever since. But the policy for maternity paternity there is that women can get, I think it's like up to a year off for maternity leave, and it's paid, or there's a maternity rate or something along those lines. There's a maternity situation for them, whereas men get 2 weeks.
Yeah, I was going to say.
And there's there's nothing more. There's no additional. There's no.
You can't even ask for more.
Yeah, there's no like, oh, she'll come back and then you can work, and there's like nothing like that. So, I think we both agree that something has to be done about maternity paternity leave. Maybe it's not so obvious that something has to be done about it, but I think I'd personally like to see a change in that law, or maybe a change in the legislation, so that could be a bit fairer, because you know you might have these like women that are quite career orientated. They might have a lot of like masculine traits. Maybe they will progress up the career ladder sort of thing. But if they also want to have a child, it's like, well, I mean, you've kind of got a handicap there, haven't you?
Right, exactly, yeah.
So I'd like to see a situation where it was maybe a bit fairer, and because your proposal was to like equal the two of them, and my proposal was to give them like a pool of leave that they could like pull from. Either of them, they could choose how long they wanted to spend away from each other, which is almost the same thing. But
there's much of a muchness difference. Exactly.
Yeah, there's like a tiny bit of like nuance, and that was how stupid the argument was, because we're basically saying the same thing.
Yeah.
But I'd quite like to see, so when a child is born, it'll have like a certain amount of time that it needs someone to like look after it. It'll have, and women get that year or whatever, and then the child, I'm not sure what they're expected to do after that, like go to like preschool or something along those lines. Grandparents to help out, all that stuff. So I think the government would probably be doing like a good progressive thing to be saying this is how much time a child needs to be like looked after, sort of thing. This is like there's like, I don't know, a year and a half of like
Sure.
time that where you'll have to be with your child to like raise it, sort of thing. And to say, you know, if you're a mother or a father, you can pull from that time, like you can separate it up so that somebody will always be there with the child. And if the woman wants to go into the workplace and the man doesn't, like, because there might be a bunch of dads out there as well that want to
Yeah.
stay at home and look after their kids, and they can't because they don't get maternity leave, sort of thing,
Hmm. Hmm.
where they can just pull from this time, and over the course of a year and a half they spread it between them. That to me seems like a really good way to do it. And it also means that if women do want to look after their kids and men want to stay in the workplace, you can keep going as you are right now. You know, the man could take 2 weeks and the woman could have the year if she wanted it. The
Hmm.
only
Hmm.
maybe a slight issue that I see with that is there's probably like a medical period after a child is born where a woman like has to be off her work, sort of thing. I don't know how long that would be, you know, 4, 5, 6 weeks. I'm not entirely sure. But then
Hmm.
that would kind of be mandated, sort of thing. And then
Yeah, that would be outside of the pool. Then they'd have like the additional pool hours or whatever. That could be taken into account in the law quite
or it could
easily, I
even
think.
be within the pool. You know, that if she has to have 6 weeks at
Sure,
the start,
sure.
she can take that 6 weeks, and that's like part of her sort of divided part of it. You know, something
Mm.
along those lines. I feel like making steps in that direction might help it in some way, shape, or form, especially for like promotions. I think
Mm.
anyway.
Yeah, yeah. Mine's is like my theory is very similar to yours. Basically, what I said was that just give men equal. I think what my argument was, it was just like give men equal maternity leave to women, and the idea is that if that man wants to work, he'll keep working. If the woman wants to work, she'll keep working. You always have the option for whoever to look after the kid to look after the kid. It's probably like a degree of less flexibility than yours. Instead of having a pool and divvying it, I was just saying give it to one person or the other, but it's effectively the same thing. And it's exactly what you're saying right there. It's like it just means that you are removing gender from or sex or whatever from. Yeah, what it doesn't matter from this equation. I was like, does it matter in this? Just like removing this out of it. So like when you've got like you are hiring two 25-year-olds and you're looking at a guy and you're looking at a girl, each of these have an equal probability in 2 3 years from now of taking X amount of time off because they have to look after a kid. You cannot say with any certainty that will just be removed from your equation. Like, sure, I believe always that women will be more maternal than men. It's in the fucking name, like women will be more maternal than men. And I imagine even if we did set up a law where there was like an equal, both parents get the same degree of like responsibility or a pool or whatever, I imagine most women would take off all the time, and most guys would probably take off a couple months. I think that's how the system would sort itself out. But at the end of the day, you'd be like, it's the most free system possible, and that's kind of like the main discrepancy. Sorry, the main problem I think that you and I have with the gender pay gap is that you and I, what we want, this is kind of a Jordan Peterson one as well, and you know what I'm going to say, like you and I want equal means of opportunity. We want everyone to be in the exact same playing field so that when they enter a field and they have this much education, they have the exact same chances as someone else that's walking into that field. I don't want every workplace to have 50% women and 50% men. It's because that means inevitably there are going to be people there that don't love their job, or they've just been incentivized to go there because they're earning more
Yeah, they
money than the
haven't
opposite
chosen it.
gender.
No.
Yeah, exactly. It's not. It's just fundamentally not fair, and people have the. It's warped what's happened with the gender payback. It's warped what's happened with the gender pay gap because we're doing the exact opposite. It's basically the point you said at the very start of the conversation. Like, we are forcing people out of the natural distribution of things, and we believe that we're doing that because we're trying to make it better for them. When it's it's crazy that people just don't say the way things are is because people like it that way. There has to be a malevolent force behind
I
it.
think you're right. I don't think that the solution that I'm proposing solves the gender pay gap in any way. It,
No,
it,
no,
it
no.
might reduce it slightly, but I think once something like that is implemented, you can then turn around and say, well, the gender pay gap still exists, but we know it's not that anymore because you chose that, sort of thing. Like, and if there is a discrepancy in wages because of that factor, if women are still taking more maternity leave, it's like, well, at least they're choosing to do that. If like you've given them the choice,
Sure,
you've kind of
sure.
handed them the ball, and you've gone like, which way do
Mm-hmm.
you want to go with it? And they've then said, well, actually, I would like to be at home with my child, and I'm like, perfect. Because if
Exactly.
you've chosen that, if you've thought about it and that's what you want to do, and for your family situation that's good for you, then sure that must make you happier. Now that's
Right.
the thing that will like drive you forward. And as you say, women are, I think it's obvious, women are more maternal than men are, and it makes sense that they would want to do that, and that would like give them happiness, because you can see it in the careers that they choose. Like my mum, for example, is an EYO, which is an early years officer, which is like dominated by women, like teaching and stuff like that, dominated by women.
Yeah.
The occupations which look after people, dominated by women. And it's like, makes so much sense that they would want to do that at home as well. And like, if they had the choice to do that and we were just giving them it, and they were still choosing the way things are now, at least you can say, you know, they've been given the equal opportunity, and let them do whatever the fuck they want to do.
Yeah. I agree with you. I see. I can imagine, if I'm like forcing my perspective, like if I was born a woman, I'm imagining myself, I probably would be somewhat pissed off that the natural proclivity that it seems for women's disposition leads them towards occupations which aren't as recognized as other occupations. I do see inequality there. It's, however, one of the ones that I don't see how there's a solution to that inequality, right? It's because like the reason that I don't know, like you, it seems to me that these, like what you're talking about, you know, primary school education and like, you know, assisting people and like social care and, you know, NHS workers, they're just not well-paying jobs. You know, they're not like university.
I would say criminally underpaid, actually.
Yeah, exactly. That is the thing. I think they are underpaid, but like, how do you like? You know, for the classic example is nursing versus engineering. Engineering is like mostly guys. Engineering is mostly girls. They're both really tough jobs, but could you justify like lowering one and raising the other? Like, I don't, you can't, it doesn't work like that. Like, it's what you talked about last week. Like, naturally the market has determined values that people attribute to people that pursue these careers. The market has determined that what we need in order to have enough supply of nurses and to keep them happy and to keep them employed is to give them, you know, an average of 25 grand a year. And engineers, because they go like X years of uni, or they need this experience or charterships or whatever, we give them, you know, more money a year. I can see how that would kind of feel shit, you know? Do you see how?
Yeah.
I get that argument, I really do.
But I understand how that would be frustrating as well. But I think I do anyway. Obviously, we're not women. We can't like comment on how they feel or anything like that. But I can appreciate that it probably would be pretty shit. And to an extent, it kind of frustrates me because, you know, like as looking back at last week again when we spoke about money and how I personally think that money is a root of quite a lot of evil in the world.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like, again, it is the root of a problem there, where it's like the jobs that manifest money get paid like a lot more than the jobs that don't manifest money, and the jobs that manifest money are inherently masculine. So you have all these engineering fields, and they're like cutting corners left, right, and centre. They're doing the bare minimum they can just to fucking get money in the door to like increase the bottom line. You have like nurses who are bursting their arses every single day when they go into their jobs. They're working overtime that they're not getting paid for. They're, you know, working harder, if not just as hard, if not harder, than any man in like an engineering field sort of thing. And
yeah, probably equivalently hard, I would imagine.
Yeah, and they're not. It seems to me like they don't get the pay that's justified, especially after the pandemic, when like MPs like turned down a pay rise for them and stuff like that. It's like, I just don't understand how the government seems to be able to find money to do certain things, but they don't find money to like give nurses like a wage rise and stuff like that, you know? And the NHS, this is definitely a topic for another day, but the NHS is like this really inefficient machine right now, where it's like, it's like so poorly run. It's like unbelievable. It's like a black hole for money. It's literally a pit where people throw money into and they have no idea where it goes. And it's like, if the system was just run a bit better, you could give nurses and doctors and surgeons, like, well, I guess they probably get paid a lot anyway, but like nurses and like the staff that like work there, they could get a pay rise if the system was just more efficient, you know?
But that's what I'm thinking though. Like, the government doesn't decide what the salaries are. The market decides what the salaries are, you know? Like, it's not made by any one person. And like, this is what's bizarre about it. It's like we I often think about when I think about occupations, like the whole concept of value and how it's just all fucked up, you know? Because like, how is the person that lays the roads any less important than the person that uses those roads to get to work in the morning, or the ambulance driver that has to use those roads? Like, everything's fucking connected. If you don't have your plumber, then your house isn't going to run. And fuck, what the surgeon's going to do when he can't take a shite, type of thing, you know? Like, every single job has its value. So it's weird that we do how we end up justifying how much money they should get paid, and you hit it exactly on the head there. I think that it is purely dictated by how much profit can be made, and when it comes to caring for people, there's no money to be made, you know, like social care, these things, like fucking primary school education, these money doesn't exist here. And like the NHS, like, it was never designed to make money, but it's just another example of, like, you know, the money goes poof when you throw it at it. So it's, I don't know, how do you, there is no way
it just
about
seems
it.
like to me that money is like fundamentally sort of like rots things to the point where it just becomes about making money, whereas like it's no longer about the service you're providing, you know, whereas NHS workers are providing a great service that everyone benefits from. You fall ill, they help you, sort of thing. And like, I am an engineer, I do work on the roads, like the company that like lays the roads, and it's like that's a service as well. And there's no, from the things that I've designed, there's no doubt there's been like hundreds of thousands of people that have utilized those and like benefited from like something that I've designed.
Exactly, yeah.
But I don't get paid because of how good my service is. I get paid because the service that I do makes money. Like,
Right,
that itself seems inherently unfair to me, you know, where it's like the services are, I guess what I'm saying is maybe you should be paid based on how beneficial your service is and like how high the skill set needs to be for you to get into that, as opposed to, well, how much money does your service make, because if it doesn't make any money, we're not paying you anything, sort of thing.
Yeah,
you know. But it's like, the system, the society isn't like set up in that way, you know. It's like not set up to do that.
yeah. I was thinking along the same lines of you there. I was trying to think of like how if we could like shift our concept of value towards, instead of monetary value in like society, you know, like the highest paying jobs will be the ones that, you know, have the biggest difference in terms of like global happiness levels, or that type of thing.
Once we figure that one out, something like the environment, fixed.
Well, that's the thing. We'll be living in fucking Star Trek once we get
Utopia.
there. That's why I don't think it's going to happen.
No, yeah,
you know,
no.
it's because like what every single time we've spoken about like money and markets, our understanding is that, like, you know, we have an input, it gives us an output. We can't tweak these things, or we can't. I think we have much less control than we ever care to admit. The market right now, a capitalistic market, is geared to make money, and that means that these services, which provide value in different ways, for instance, like the healthcares and like these industries, which tend to, I think, be more orientated towards female workers, it's just, you know, it's a shame, but they're never going to earn as much. And yeah, that was my main point. Like, I can see how that would feel a bit shit, and I do get where a lot of the crap about the pay rise, the wage gap comes from. Also, like, we mentioned this is another facet of the wage gap now I realize, but we mentioned like the vast majority of the pay difference is because like women are in less higher positions than men. But also, like, there must be something to do with the fact that, like, humans are like social creatures and like herd animals. Like, if you are a woman going into a field that is dominated by men, there will be a stigmatism towards you, right? You like almost like an inherent sexism.
So,
you know, people.
Yeah, definitely. That was probably one of the things that I was talking about when I mentioned about how myself and my female colleague went into our review scores, and like I argued for a higher score, whereas she was willing to accept a lower score.
Right.
The differences in personality are probably also at play in the gender pay gap, and that probably seems like an issue that we can deal with, but there's like no incentive for like businesses to do so, sort of thing. Because
businesses actually don't want that.
Yeah,
because they want to pay people as little as possible.
Like when you go into your review score, and especially if it's like if it determines how much your pay rise is influenced like that. Your business wants to give you the lowest score possible so that it doesn't have to give you any more money. Like it wants to pay you as little as it possibly can so that it can see the maximum output from like your work. And I don't mean output in terms of like the quality of the work you provide.
No,
the bottom line,
the money you make.
Yeah, the money that you make for the company, it'll be more because you're being paid less. So businesses like aren't inclined to like give you the pay rises that you have earned. They just want you to keep you where you are and like get you doing more work, sort of thing. What? And I'm not. That seems like a tough one. I'm not sure how to solve that one. You know?
Yeah. It's because like I agree that when it comes to like these differences in personality, that's the type of thing that can be educated. Like you can tell. If like I remember fucking watching like some podcast or some lecture or something, and it was like talking about how women workers can get taught male traits, which end up leading to them succeeding more in a workplace. And like you might think that that's wrong because women shouldn't have to learn male traits, but regardless of what you think about that, women that do end up learning masculine traits end up doing better in business. That's just the way it is. Fuck.
Yeah, so it was probably a good thing to like teach women, to like teach them how to be like, how to be like assertive and how to like go into these things and dominate the conversation, you know?
So that's the thing. I think that education is the answer to that. I think it can quite easily be achieved. Like now we're talking about lost conversation. This is one of the ones we should be working on. The problem is that, like you said, like businesses are actively fighting against you being educated about your pay. They actually don't want that. They want you like see the amount of businesses where it's like, oh hush, don't ask about someone's salary. That's rude. It's like that's rude because businesses told you it's rude because they want you in the dark. Yeah. That's one of these social things that makes my blood boil. Actually, people being afraid to talk about money because like sure I get it. You don't want to fucking show off about money because folk will rob you or whatever like that. But at the end of the day, you're talking to work colleagues. You're doing the same job as them. You should have an understanding of money. If we talk about it all the time, it makes the world go round half the time, and we're strongly advised not to talk about that. It's like it's putting people it's putting like the employees on the back foot. They're effectively being exploited, and that has to pay into the gender pay gap to some extent as well. Or if not, then I think that education could alleviate a small extent of that, what we see in the gender pay gap.
From what I've seen in my field as well, there's quite a lot of like women in engineering movements at the moment, you know, especially
lots and lots.
I've seen that at like uni, and I've seen it at work now. There's a lot of these movements that are trying to get girls involved in engineering, which is great. All for that. One of the things that I'm seeing from the women in engineering movements at my company though is not so much that they're encouraging women to get into engineering, but they're not. The women that are currently at the company, they're not being shown how to do things to like advance themselves. You know what I mean? Like if they were to get this sort of like, if they were to go into like a women in engineering meeting and it was to be like talk about being assertive in your PDR, or it was to be like talk about how you can have goals in your your work to try and like increase your pay to get that promotion sort of thing. It seems like the sort of the goals as women in engineering movements, they're not really. I don't think they're quite in the right place, if you know what I mean. But it's like we're trying to get more girls in, but it's like that's not really doing anything, you know. Like more girls should be here. It's like, right? Okay.
I think because I work for an engineering company as well, so I get the same emails you're getting probably. You know, like a new seminar this week hosted by chief engineer of INEOS type of things. Like tune in, represent women in science, and it's like it is a good thing. But you're right, like there's no. Sure, you want more women to get involved, but when you actually look around, you don't see that. Also, the thing is that what you're talking about, like assertiveness training, it would almost. I can imagine in our environment that implicitly being picked up as, oh, women are worse than men. They need to be taught how to become more like men, and people would have a fucking hissy fit about that because these days implying there is any difference between anyone can be construed the wrong way. I think it's particularly for a business which like all they do is think about risk mitigation. You know, that's part how they make money. They're not going to try and like bring gender into it. They just want it to be more women, you know, and then they just want to close the book. And because getting into a difficult conversation about that is not what businesses want to do. Like, but businesses are the most touchy fucking organizations out there. They're when it comes to talking about these see when it comes to difficult issues, the stuff that we talk about in our podcast, man, I wouldn't talk about these at work, you know, like unless it was like a specific, yeah, I'm like, don't tell them, you know, unless it was like talking to a specific person. But it's not a type of conversation you start with a random person. It's because there's always the chance that someone just like mentioned that to their boss, they mention it to their boss, HR gets involved, and all of a sudden you're fired. It's like,
Loose as a Nazi.
He's like, how did this happen? All I had was a swastika on my arm, type of thing. But I do see a problem with how businesses deal with this issue. It seems, to me, this feels like pandering, which I loathe.
Yeah, and finally, I guess we probably should mention that I do think sexism probably does play a part into the gender pay gap. It must be a factor in some way, shape, or form. Like you're saying, but with the sign company that you worked at, when the guy was like actively not like looking forward and being like, "Well, she'll just get pregnant," sort of thing.
Like, there is that exists.
There must be an element of that. Now it's not something that I've seen at my work, because I get the impression that if a manager or a boss was to bring something like that up, when a company like when a company gets like so big, that thing is going to get whistleblown.
That's what
like
I mean.
That.
You know,
and
HR will get involved.
You'll be like out, sort of thing. You know, so it's not something that I've seen, and it's definitely something that if I did see, I would whistleblow on. I'd actively go to their boss and be like, "Do you fucking know what he just said? Like, fucking fire him," sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't, because I'm not a grass, but.
If my company's listening to this, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
No, but I mean, there must be an element of that, like in workplaces.
Yeah, no, there is.
You know,
I believe there is.
Maybe it's not in like engineering workplaces, because there is such a push for like women to get into these fields. But what if you think about like mechanics and stuff like that, like people that
think about plumbing,
like
think about bin drivers,
like labourers and stuff like that, you know.
Sure, yeah.
These male-dominated fields where there's no HR department here. There's no one telling you what you can and can't say, sort of thing. There's no one driving.
It's just a bunch of guys on a building site, you know. I can imagine it would be like, I do feel for like women that go into like joinery, you know, like that would be quite fucking tough, you know. Like I've worked on building sites before, and men are crass bastards, you know, and particularly in these like spaces where it is really dominated by men, particularly like kind of older men.
Masculine
I think
men,
it's
really masculine men.
Yeah.
Masculine men.
The toxic masculine men, exactly. Like there are certain workforces which get that, and that's the type of thing that I really understand how you would feel like oppressed, literally oppressed, working in that type of environment. That is another one. I think it's probably, there's like something to be said for like men and women, because I think that men can go into a field that's dominated by women, and they probably wouldn't feel as actively oppressed as maybe a male dominated environment. There would be an equal degree of domination there. It's just that I don't know. I imagine a woman would feel a lot more comfortable in that situation than a man, and the vice versa version of it. I don't know if physicality or something.
Yeah, maybe it's probably the physical implications. Although I can imagine that a man in a female dominated field would probably still feel maybe.
It would be different ways.
Feel just as excluded, but like in a different way, right? Because women in a male dominated field, like that's like a bunch of guys and like one woman. It's like you're powerless here. Whereas like a man and a group of a bunch of women, it's kind of like, well, I still have some power here. You know what I mean? Like, if a fight breaks out, I'm still going to win, sort of thing.
Sure, exactly, yeah. But I feel that in that type of situation, like, like men and women like exert their influence differently, and I genuinely believe there's like men, it does come down to physicality, but I do believe, and this is somewhat anecdotal, I suppose, because I've never read any evidence on this, but I believe in my heart that like women are more socially adept than men when it comes to like circles of conversations and like keeping track of who said what, and like this type of like perception of self and people around you.
My girlfriend,
women are on that. Yeah, exactly, man. This is what I'm saying. Like, I believe that women might be like maybe programmed to pick up on this stuff better than guys. So like they have, and that's a strength. The same way that guys' physicality is a strength. Those things are definitely positive traits. It's just the type of things that would manifest in environments that have a massive disparity between the genders. You know.
I think that the sexism one probably, I would hazard a guess to say that it's probably vanishing in white workplaces as like the younger generation, like
I hope so.
The more educated generation. It's kind of like, it's like racism and homophobia, I think, where it's like, I think and I hope these things are on the way out. Like as the younger generations, like it seems to be like older people that have these inherent thoughts, exactly. Whereas like I've never met anyone, well, I probably have met some.
Not many people.
Have met someone my age that's like sexist or homophobic or something like that. But it definitely seems to be like a much smaller percentage than like the boomers, for example. You know,
Sure.
there seems to be like quite a lot of them that are like homophobic, racist. Like everyone's got a racist grandparent, you know, whereas
Yeah, sure,
there are
sure.
not any friends in my circle, I would say, that are racist.
Well, 2 points actually. Like, I fucking hate that people think that their grandparents are racist. It's like, sure, by today's standards they're a racist, but back then everyone spoke that way, so stop calling them a goddamn racist. But anyway, you're right. What I was going to say though was that I think a lot of that has to do with education. That's one of the examples. You know, on the show we're constantly badgering about educate people. I really believe that like the UK has done a really, really good job on teaching against education, against education, against racism. Like this is the type of thing that like see most people like outraged. Like it's just you don't even think about it, you know, or like someone will say something racist or like, you know, not racist, but like some sort of connotation. You look at a microaggression, and you look over at the young person, you'd be like, can you believe you said that type of thing? You know, like it's the type of thing that these type of disparities that you notice with the young generation, it's just not there. And I really, really do believe that in another 30 years, it will be more or less gone. At least in educated environments, as I said, like we both work in like engineering firms. That is very different from, you know, working with laborers. You know, and there
But
will
even
be a
even like in
degree.
the schools though, I feel like in school today
Sure,
it's like more,
I
and like
agree.
you know everyone goes to school sort of thing. So like even the people that do go into these sort of labouring fields, they've been brought up in an environment that's like more inclusive. So once they
Hmm.
go into that environment, they're hopefully to be less likely to exhibit those traits. You know, it's kind of like
I think less
dying down.
likely, yeah. Yes, yes. I feel that there might be a correlation between lack of education and racism. Like people that are less intelligent might be more likely to have an us and them attitude. I don't know if I'm making it up or that's true or not. But you're right. I think education for the most part will iron that out. There will always be people that just think in that stupid way.
I think.
Because even like
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, because like even at our school, you're talking about how it's educated, and like you and I, we were taught the same thing. But there were people that in our like high school that were straight up racists, you know, and they were
Sure.
given the same education as we are. So it's not completely foolproof, but I do believe that it does help a lot.
Yeah, I'd like to hope that sort of thing is like vanishing now anyway.
Hmm.
And as people sort of grow up, like sexism is becoming less of an issue because you just can't see, especially over the last couple of years. I've spoken about this like in some detail that like I just don't have any fucking time for racists and homophobes and transphobes and sexists anymore. I just fucking I'm like at my wit's end with them. You know, I'm like, oh, I go over the last like couple of years, I've really started to realize how idiotic they really are. And it's like as soon as you ask any of these people why they think what they think, they just have no idea. They just
Mm.
do not know. It's like
No, no,
they'll
no.
just spew vitriol into the world, and you'll be like, why do you think that? And they'll be like, well, blah, 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 blah. And it's like
Yeah.
you've like not even thought your own opinion like through. It's like you've just like literally opened your mouth and said the first thing that's came to your mind, and I'm like, I just don't have any time for it anymore. You know, it's become
Yeah.
I just I'm losing like my patience to like argue with them as well.
Mm.
What
How many people are you encountering that are straight up racist, man?
I don't
That's what
think I
I'm
don't
wondering.
think it's a lot, but I think every time I do encounter someone that says something like that, it takes a lot out of me to argue with them. Like it's like
Mm.
I always do it, but I think it's quite like a confrontational
I don't
thing to
think
do.
you're going to change their mind. I don't.
No,
I think, see, when I hear older people say something racist, like, you know, even not like overtly racist, you know, like literally spreading hate, just like a, you know, like you said, a micro transition or something like that. To be honest with you, most of the time I leave it. You know, I don't even bother. It's because I don't think I'll have a discussion about it, but I won't try and change their mind. It's because
no, there's almost no
I
point.
don't think that's going to work. You know,
It's almost like
like
I just
that.
want to like tell you that I disagree with that sort of thing. Like I'm like,
Sure, sure.
no, just what you said, no.
I get it. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
it always becomes like quite a confrontational
It is. Yeah.
situation, which I think I'm not really sure that I like that kind of interaction. To be honest, it's not, and it does weigh on me quite a bit afterwards. I think
Mm,
so.
mm.
We've spoken in quite a bit of detail about some of the factors that we think will affect the gender pay gap. What should we be doing about it? What can we be doing like today? What can we be doing going forward to try and change this? Should we be changing anything?
Mm, mm. Well, I think, yeah, the crux of this conversation was really, what do you mean by solving the gender pay gap? Really, you know.
Well,
If you
I
think that
guess
you have,
because we can have like our small effects and the small bubbles that we have. Like once I become a manager at my work, and once you
Mhm.
become a manager at your work, we can have we can have the review score discussions with like employees, and we can discuss with them, and we can try and be fairer. Like we could do that. We could try and fight to get the women that are in our fields more pay, stuff like that. We have like our own small like spheres of influence, but we don't have any like major power on like a widespread
we're not
scale.
changing laws now.
Which is what I was talking about at the start of the episode when I spoke about opinions going forward and affecting your votes. Because if you look at like next time a vote comes around, you know, your general election or whatever, and you look at the parties and you think, well, are any of you guys doing anything about the gender pay gap? And it's like there will obviously be a bunch of parties. I think there was like a women's party that ran last time in the general election, and I'd imagine looking at the
Seems destined to fail, doesn't it?
I'd imagine looking at those policies, they'd have been like extreme to the extreme. You know what I mean? Whereas if you look at the parties like Labour, Liberal Democrats, stuff like that, you can look at like what are the changes that you're trying to make here that I think might be good. So, like where are the directions that you're going that I could sort of get along with, and then I'll maybe
Sure.
like I'll
Yeah.
make me more likely to vote for them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
Mm.
I'm just trying to do something in my little sphere as much as I can. Try and keep it fair. Try not to let the pressures of business affect those decisions, and then look at how I can affect things on a bigger scale, like with my vote.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense, to be honest with you. That is, realistically speaking, all we really can do. Like, when it comes to like work, we can just like, the point of every single one of these episodes is for ourselves and any viewers that end up watching, is to try and just make you think about it. As much as we say we're here to like draw conclusions, most of the time we don't draw conclusions. The point is to take a topic and put it on the table and then digest that, you know. And most of the time you can't draw a conclusion and take away something to do. This is one of those ones where it's like, you're not going to walk out of your house and live a different life after thinking about the gender pay gap, but it will educate you in small ways. And when you have
It's going to come
conversations
up
with
in
people,
your life at one
right?
point or another. Someone's going to talk
Sure.
about it. It's going to come up at work, you know, and you'll have thought about
Yeah.
it now, sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And that's brilliant. It's because like it just means that you can have a conversation with someone and not be flapping around. And better than anything, best case scenario, whether you change their mind or not, you're introducing them into another field of thought, and once you've planted that idea in there's real benefits to that. So yeah, I guess general communication is good. Voting makes sense in terms of when you're looking at parties to vote. I'm probably less likely to read about what they're doing about a gender pay gap and just like read about how they even phrase it. You know, I want to make sure that they think about this in the similar lines. I don't actually want to know what their actions are in that stage right now. I guess it's because I don't think they do it anyway. But just making sure that they aren't pandering would be brilliant. It's because we need the key here, I think, is education. People, even outside of like, we spent some time talking about, you know, teaching people about different gender personality traits and how that apply to different workplaces. That's like an advanced. Just teaching people how the gender pay gap isn't as simple as you might think. When we say 6%, the 6% difference in pay gaps, why don't we have a small discussion about why that might be? You know, like that's the things that I'm really thinking about going forward. Is just
The
trying to
radicals
educate
won't
people.
like that, Lewis. They won't like that.
They will
one
not
bit.
like that. Yeah, exactly.
Critical
That's the
thinking?
type.
No.
You
get
shut
that
the
out
fuck
of
up,
there.
boy.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. HR's on the phone, Liz.
Yeah. Just to leave it on like one final note as well. When I was researching about the studies that the UK have like mandated into the gender pay gap and about how these companies that have over 250 employees must do like produce their findings, sort of thing. I almost want to come back to when you say that, yes, like they kind of approach it the wrong way around. They look at it like backwards. They look at like money, and that's like it. That's the only thing that they look at. Like,
Right.
there don't seem to be any like studies done into like, are people choosing this? Are people happy with the way things are? Because it's very easy to prevent someone with a statistic that says, oh, the pay is different, and for that person to go, well, I'm not fucking happy about that.
Yeah. Pay women more.
But like, that's not. It's not as simple as that, you know. Where it's like,
No.
you might be talking to someone who is a nurse, you know, who's like chosen to go into like one of those fields, and it's like, I wonder how much of the differences in what people make is down to the choices that they make and the things that they choose. Like, there must be like, and I think I'm one of these people. There must be a certain kind of person in the world that is willing to sacrifice a little bit of money in order to be happy. Like, I openly tell my friends that once I become like a chartered engineer, I'm going to like cut back to 4 days a week because chartered engineers make a lot of money. I'm not going to need 4/5 of that, so I'm going to cut back to 4 days a week and take an extra day at the weekend. And I'm like, that sounds fucking great, you know? And that's not going to like increase my gender's pay by a mean or median value, but it's going to make me a bit happier, I think. You know, it's something
Sure.
something that I'm going to try out, and I'm willing to sacrifice a bit of my salary to do it.
Yeah, yeah. That is, I guess, a very general key takeaway point is that the kind of subtext we have this entire conversation is that we want people to be happy with the job they're working in, you know. And some people are like really fucking, they just want to turn up to work and work 8 hours a week, and that's fine. And you tend to find that guys do that more often than girls, and that's just one of those that's one of those facts. But with all issues we talk about, you kind of never pigeonhole one single person. We want you to have to be as happy as you can in your workplace and have an active role about what makes you happy. Like, I don't want women going into STEM because they think that they're taught in primary school that more women should be in STEM. I want women to go into STEM that are interested in engineering and maths and science, you know, and like this, it seems obvious, but yeah, that is probably a good place to leave it on.
It's almost like a little bit ironic that it's like libertarian people that are being like, oh, everyone should do what they want, everyone should choose what they want to do, everyone should be happy, and then all of a sudden they go, yeah, but we're not earning the same. Like this 3.5 billion people aren't earning the same as this 3.5 billion people, and it's like, what? What did you do?
Yeah.
Like, what? So you want the individual to choose what they do, but you also want them to make the same choices. It's like that doesn't.
Yeah,
those things don't.
Are you authoritarian? Are you libertarian?
Yeah, make up your
one.
fucking mind, exactly.